everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with Christian Twigg. Yay!
Hey, man. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. So starting from the beginning, as we always like to do, we like to hear a little bit going all the way back. How did you get started in music, and particularly on bass?
Yeah, kind of a funny story. I started listening to music when I was 15, and I guess even before that. I think it kind of ties into my story that goes well into the future here, but that I really started as an athlete. So I played every sport that I possibly could. I was into soccer and hockey and baseball and tennis, and so everything I could get my hands on. I was super active and super physical as a kid, and I started listening to heavy metal music. Was really my first love in music, and I was listening to old Metallica records, and I had a buddy who in high school who had a band, and he said, "Hey, we're looking for a singer, and would you want to come and audition for the band because we're playing this talent show?" And I said, yeah, man, I've never sung before in my life, but I love music and I love the songs that you're doing. So yeah, man, let's just give it a try. So I go down, I do the audition, and I was terrible. I was just awful. I had no concept or clue of pitch or just understanding anything about music. It was just completely off the cuff. So my friend, he was the bass player. And so he said, it would really help you understand music better is that if you picked up an instrument. So he had an extra bass, and he started teaching. He taught me I don't remember, man. It was like Louie or something like that. Just super easy stuff, right? But I started playing bass, and then the rest is history. I just immediately gravitated towards it. And that bass didn't even work. I couldn't even plug it in. Yeah, man. So then I just dove in really deep. I really was self-taught as a teenager, and then just learned as much as I could by ear and went from there.
Got you. Now, did you pursue further training after the fact?
Yeah, I did. So then after high school, I actually went to a music school. It was called Music Tech, and it was in Minneapolis, and that school actually ended up turning into what was called McNally Smith. And McNally Smith ended up going out of business, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. So I did get some formal training, and that's actually how I got involved with the beginning of the band that I was in from Minneapolis. That led into this whole thing with meeting Pharrell. I went to music school with the guitar player of Spy Mob. I just connected with him. We were really good friends. My buddy, Brent Paschke, he is still Pharrell's guitar player. So he plays with Pharrell when Pharrell does solo gigs and N.E.R.D shows.
So for people that don't know how this all kind of ties together, you were playing with Spy Mob.
Correct.
And kind of simultaneously, Pharrell had put together a project with Chad Hugo known as N.E.R.D.
Yes.
And they had recorded an album In Search Of, but he shelved it because he wasn't happy with it. So, 15 years and 7 months later, I guess, you guys managed to connect. What happened there?
All right, so after high school, I had made friends with my buddy Brent, and this Minneapolis-based band, they had been playing together for quite a while. Well, they got a major record deal with Epic Records. So they recorded an album. This is before I was in the band. Mm-hmm. They recorded a record for Epic, and the last minute, Epic decided to drop the band. Oh. Well, when they dropped the band, the bass player also quit. So I don't totally remember this. I can't remember who called who, but I just remember getting in touch with my buddy Brent, and he said, because I'd just like to check in with him and just see how everything was going with this exciting thing that he was going through, this major label deal.
Sure.
Well, he said, I got some bad news. We lost the deal, and we lost our bass player. And so we recently connected, and I think he thinks that he called me to ask me if I wanted to audition, but I think I called him, and I honestly can't remember. But anyway, I ended up with an audition and got into Spy Mob. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then Spy Mob has this major label record recording in the can and no label. So their lawyer was able to work out a way for them to get those masters and that album, which was great. But I was in the band for about a year, and we were just in the shed, man. We were just working on writing new songs, playing, and just getting our shit together. Yeah. So it was about a year into it, if I remember right. We got this call from our lawyer, and he said, hey, Pharrell Williams is a super fan of your band, and he wants to sign the band to his record label when he starts. You know, he was doing all these meetings in the music industry with major labels wanting to start a label for himself, a subsidiary label. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to sign Spy Mob as his first act when that happened. So we were like, okay, well, we don't know who this guy is. We just heard he was like a hip hop producer. So we were like, great, you know, we got another deal.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Then Pharrell's idea was, well, I just recorded this album with my buddies, this N.E.R.D record, mm-hmm. and it was all programmed, and they did a European release, and I think this was 2001. They did a European release. So Pharrell decided to shelf that album and then re-record it with live instruments. Gotcha. So he thought the way to kind of start promoting our band was to have us play on his record. And then one thing turned into another. We went to Virginia Beach, where he's based out of, or used to be based out of, and we recorded that record in a couple of weeks. And then after that, we started getting some gigs. Some gigs started turning into some tours. And then we probably did that gig for like 4 years. Toured all over the world, played on countless TV shows like Saturday Night Live, and it was an amazing experience. And the whole thing was really, the whole idea originally was to launch our band Spy Mob, mm-hmm. right? So we did all this backing up at Pharrell with N.E.R.D in the spirit of getting our band and launching our band on Pharrell's label, which was ended up on Arista Records, and at the time, N.E.R.D was the head of the label, and they sat on us for like a year and a half. And so we were just, which was fine at the time because we were playing with N.E.R.D and touring and doing all those album, we did 2 album cycles with them. Yeah, once we got through that, then Arista was like, okay, we are on board, we're ready to go, let's launch this record. So we took 6 months to promote the record and got reviewed. We were doing all this media training. We were doing all these things. And then N.E.R.D pulled the plug last minute, right before our national release. So then it was kind of like, that was kind of it. Pharrell was so pissed. And so he was like, you know, stick with me, guys. We're going to get a new label. And yeah, man, it was crazy. A roller coaster ride, man. Music business. It was tough.
Well, so. and so much, you hear so many stories of decisions and things that happened in the music business that had to do with non-musicians and executives, and for whatever reason doing what they're going to do. It's kind of notorious, and it's kind of one of the nice things about current times, that the labels, although if you've got a label, it's great, but with so much self-production and self-working, I think a lot more music sees the light of day and doesn't end up in some dusty old bin somewhere that some guy just thought, well, you know, we're not going to do this, you know. And sometimes they have more of a business idea in mind. I actually was involved with a group that we changed labels because they made us an attractive offer, only to discover that they were burying our records in distribution because they were promoting another band like us. Yeah. And so we got a chunk of change, but the other band got all the radio time and all the touring and stuff. So you kind of go, okay, dude, what, you know? And it was just business. They paid us off to shut us up. So
Yeah.
stuff like that happens. But also with the kind of music, this particular, it's always part of the evolution, because as you mentioned, Pharrell was so much involved with the hip hop and stuff, and this project ended up being kind of a merging of pop and rock, but other sounds as well. There's elements of kind of Latin, elements of kind of country, kind of this new blend.
Yeah. That was such an interesting thing about working with Pharrell, is he has this ability to work with all kinds of different people, write in different styles, and he can pull it all off, which was amazing. He could work with, you're a hardcore rap guy.
Mm-hmm.
He could work with Britney Spears, and yet somehow he still had all the cred.
Yeah.
Which was amazing to watch. So when they sent us the In Search of record, they said, we want you to listen to this. We want you to, before you come out and re-record it, we want you to listen to it. And, it was kind of cool because Pharrell really gave us a lot of freedom and a lot of license. Like, he didn't really direct us to do anything necessarily in particular. And as a matter of fact, when we were in the studio recording that record, he was off recording like other artists at different studios. And so he's bouncing around between 2 or 3 different studios. And he'd come in at the end of the day, listen to what we did. And it was always so funny because he'd come in and he would just he'd have these big wide eyes, and he was happy, man. It was really cool.
Nice.
But we never really got told what to do, which was surprising. He had already been so successful in his production, and he gave us just the complete freedom to do our thing. And, I think there's people out there that maybe preferred that first version, that European version, and there's some people who preferred the version that we were a part of. Mm-hmm. But what was so cool is that something really kind of unique happened when the two things came together. Mm-hmm. There was definitely some, in that time, this is early 2000s, there was a lot of rap, rock going on.
Yeah.
And some people kind of put us in that category, but it wasn't anything like what was happening on the radio.
Gotcha.
So,
well, I think a lot of times the radio stations or labels will peg you into a genre because they kind of feel they have to. And
sure,
as music evolves and you see more influences of so many other things, that it gets even harder. And so a classic example, Sergio Mendes did a reboot of a lot of his tunes with Black Eyed Peas. And so you go, so what is it? Is it rap, hip hop, because that's Black Eyed Peas, or is it world music because it's Sergio Mendes? And it was a blend of the two, where it had his music, and then they would kind of do their thing over it. So you had this interlacing blend, but so now what are you going to call it? It turns out to be something new. And I'm sure, the good and the bad, as you mentioned, some people will love the new thing and they'll go, oh, wow, that's really cool. Or they'll go, oh, I really I like the two separate much better.
Yeah.
And however, but again, that's different things. So when they pulled the plug on this project, then what happened with the band?
Yeah. So then we got to this point where we felt like, well, before I was in the band, they had already been dropped by one label. This is basically the second time the band has been dropped. And so part of our thinking was kind of like, what do we do now? Here we are. We had the single most writer of most of the songs that you heard on the radio, Pharrell was responsible for. He was so big in the music industry. And our thinking was well, what do we do now? We had Pharrell in our corner. And so we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
We had this moment, man, and it was scary because we so badly believed in the record that we had, and we wanted that released. We wanted that to go out. True. We just felt like that was what we wanted to do. We got to get that record out. Well, as it turned out, we ended up getting another record deal, actually Eazy-E's label,
Okay.
Ruthless Records. So when Eazy-E passed, his wife took over. So she, I think, I don't know, I think she was trying to get the label to move in a different direction and get out from under that hardcore gangster rap kind of that reputation. And so she signed our band. And so we always laugh about that, just thinking about this super white rock band from Minneapolis who's on Ruthless Records. It's just hilarious. And so very similar to your story, all the press had been done on our album. So nobody would review it anymore. Nobody would cover it. It got released, but died on the shelf as a result of lack of promotion, essentially.
Gotcha.
So after that, really, at the very much the same time, N.E.R.D was going through some changes as well. So they were on Virgin Records, and my understanding is Pharrell was not wanting to record any more N.E.R.D records for Virgin, and I'm not sure what was behind that. I think he was unhappy with the way that his second N.E.R.D album was promoted, and so he decided to leave Virgin Records. So here we are, we released our record, it died on the shelf. N.E.R.D is no longer recording or touring. Mm-hmm. So it was like in this weird instance, it's like both of our gigs dried up.
Oh, man.
Yeah, man. It was like the rug just got pulled out, you know. And so the band kind of fizzled. The Spy Mob kind of fizzled. We did record a country record and released kind of a country vibe to it, which is really kind of cool, but totally different from what most people know about Spy Mob. Yeah.
And that was about how long ago?
Okay, so In Search Of was recorded 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, very close to the date. So yeah, that was 20 years ago. Well, we were on the road with him probably for about 4 years. So about 15, 16 years ago.
Okay. And so then what did you do? Because right now I understand you're freelancing.
Well, I was freelancing for a while in Minneapolis. So once I lost that gig, or right towards the end of that gig, I actually started dating who's now my wife, but who was the singer of Spy Mob. It was his cousin.
Okay.
So we started dating, and she was actually opening a Pilates studio. She thought, well, because sometimes I'd go on the road. I'd be gone for like 6 weeks. Sometimes I'd be gone for 2 weeks. But in between, I didn't really have much going on. So she said, well, I was doing a lot of yoga on the road just to keep my sanity and keep my physical body together, because that's rough on the body, right? Yeah. So yeah, I was trying to keep myself together doing some yoga on the road. And she was like, well, maybe you would be interested in teaching Pilates when you're, like not on the road, and have a way to make some income. And I was like, oh, that's really smart. So my journey kind of just quickly transitioned from music to a Pilates instructor and kind of owning and running this Pilates studio in town.
Nice.
So my wife and I did that. We have 2 kids. So I basically took, 10 some years off of playing. I would noodle around a little bit here and there. But yeah, I took about 10 years off, but then I started to kind of get the bug again. I got the itch, and I started playing some kind of sub gigs, around the Minneapolis scene. And that was interesting. That was really tough, because by the time that I tried to get back into working as a bass player, the scene had totally changed. There was a lot of people who were, my perception of it was, there was a lot of people doing jobs, right? So it was kind of like nobody wanted to be like in a band anymore. There was just a lot of people doing gigs and just doing jobs. And the players are amazing. So, it's a amazing town for musicians.
Gotcha.
So I spent, probably 4 or 5 years just kind of gigging around, which, I really kind of felt like that wasn't totally my strong suit. I kind of felt like my strength is being in a band, writing, being creative, working on those songs, and getting those songs down and putting on a show. Like, I kind of felt like that was where I excelled. And that's actually how I ended up getting into this band. So now I'm actually in a band again called the Devin Worley Band, which I'm super excited about. It's like a rockin' country band. And so, yeah, I'm psyched about that.
I know as we're talking in times of the pandemic, everything has changed for everybody. So when we talk about what the scene was in Minneapolis,
yeah,
who knows what it's going to be like when the dust clears, because that's true for every venue in the country. You know, there's going to be places that go away. There's going to be places that hopefully will make it through. So with your new band, what are you guys working on currently?
Okay, so during the pandemic, actually, they wrote and released an EP. And then like the pandemic hit, so that kind of like, it just, you know, they weren't able to do the release that they felt like it deserved, unfortunately. And I'm sure there's probably countless stories of bands going through that, you know, like having new music to release, but then 2020 happens. And so what do you do with that? Well, unfortunately for them, like they lost their bass player. And so they were kind of like, what do we do now? We have this EP in the can. We lost our bass player. And so actually the guitar player of the Devin Worley Band, Jason Medvick, he was a guy that I actually played in a band with about 25 years ago. And he just called me up and said, hey, man, we lost our bass player. You know, would you be interested in coming down? And I'm like, yeah, man. Absolutely, because, you know, the pandemic, I guess the silver lining for me in the pandemic was it made me get really clear on what I wanted to do with music.
Gotcha.
And so when I got that call, I was super excited, man, because like they had the situation that I felt like was just fit so perfect for what I feel like I'm good at and wanted to pursue. So we jammed for a few weeks, and then they asked me to be a part of the band. And so I was like, yeah, man. So we are working our asses off right now, writing and working up like our live sets for when things start to open up.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Hey.
So, people are starting to book gigs. So we do have some gigs out on the calendar, whether they happen or not. Who knows, right? But we're getting ready, which I'm really excited about.
Very cool. Well, and it's probably a good point. We always like to talk about how you get your sound and your gear. I see a forest of Fenders behind you, but tell us how are you getting your sound?
Yeah, sounds good, man. I will just preface this part of the conversation by saying I am not a gearhead at all. And so, this is kind of exciting, though, for me, because once I got off the road with N.E.R.D, I got rid of all my gear.
Oh. So
I know. So then 15 years later, I'm like, oh man, I gotta get a rig,
Yeah.
So a bunch of years ago, I was playing in kind of like an R&B band, kind of funky soul. And so I was thinking, well, if I'm going to play in kind of a funk band around Minneapolis, I got to have a 5-string, right? So I kind of made the transition from 4-string to 5. And actually, I don't know, can I show you?
Sure.
So this was my 1973 P bass. This is the bass that I played on the N.E.R.D record, that In Search Of record. So I was playing 4-string my whole life. And then once I started kind of doing, more local gigs and more funky R&B kind of stuff, I started playing a 5-string. So then I picked up this guy. It's a Fender American Jazz 5-string. And I don't know if you're familiar with these guys, but I got my backbeat. Can you see that?
I do, yeah.
Got my little backbeat on there. I love that thing. It's amazing for practicing, is like the key. And low volume gigs too, because I've picked up a church gig here and there, and that's all pretty low volume on the stage there. So having that, the feeling of your notes is pretty amazing. For my amp, I just bought a Ampeg SVT7 Pro, and I'm running that through the SVT 410 HLF cab. And that is kind of my rundown. It's pretty simple. I don't do a ton of like effects, although I've been messing around with the HX Stomp from Line 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of work to do because I'm not a gearhead, it's a struggle. My attention span, trying to learn how to program sounds and stuff, man, it's a lot of work. So I got some homework to do.
Got you. Now, some of the more simple details, what kind of strings are you using?
Okay, so strings. I have been using Dunlop strings.
Okay.
And I kind of feel like I'm in between some gear here because I'm going to make some changes. Yeah, I'm going to make some changes because what I realized is that I started playing the jazz bass because I was playing more funk stuff. I started playing my old 73 P bass again, and the tone of that P bass, man, oh my God, there's just nothing like it.
Yeah. And
so I've been thinking recently that I got to go back to like what I feel like is my sound, which is flats on a P bass.
Yeah.
So I got to track down, like a 5-string P bass, which you don't see very much out there, So I got some Dunlop flats coming my way, and just kind of on the search for a P bass.
Gotcha.
So once I can dial that in, man, I think I'm going to be good.
You'd be good to go.
I'll be good to go. I'm excited.
And another detail that often gets overlooked is instrument cables. Do you have a preference in instrument cables?
None. Zero. See what I mean, man? Like, those are the types of things that I don't really pay attention to, but I'm totally open to it, man.
Sure.
Yeah.
And in a lot of instances, I think necessity is the mother of invention. And
sure.
If you are touring heavily, I know one of the things is cables that'll stand up to abuse because it's just always going to happen. People are stepping on them. They're getting thrown around. And if you've got a flimsy cable, the shielding will break. Now you've got interference. It's a problem. And so because there's a problem, people go, okay, I need to step up and get something that's going to hold up better. Then you've got with technology increasing, you've got a whole bunch of people doing wireless setups. So now there's not a cable to step on, and now it's not getting thrown around. So it changes the needs, but it's gotten so much better where sound quality and your ability to move around is you can kind of pick and choose. So the next thing, if people want to stay on top of what you're doing currently, where's the best place for people to look?
To see what I'm doing, probably just like mostly like in terms of social media. You can always look up the Devin Worley Band page on Instagram, also on Facebook, my Facebook. And I just it's kind of funny because I'm way behind on the times, but I just started an Instagram page, and that's C Twigg, CTWIGG, 2 G's on Twig. Gotcha. So I'm like way behind on that whole curve, but I'm just getting started. And so Devin Worley Band on Facebook or online. And we're starting to book some dates around the country. So I will be getting back out on the road. And so hopefully, people will check that out because again, it's kind of a rock country thing and it's pretty awesome, man. I'm pretty psyched. So I'm looking forward to getting back out.
Well, and I know that so many of us are looking forward to live music again, and it's going to be for it to come back and flourish. It's going to need people coming out and seeing the shows, and so if any way they can get a heads up, one of the worst things that has happened is sometimes you'll find out somebody's going to be in town either the day after they were there or right before they're going to show up, and you're going to like, oh man, I would have gone to see this guy. But there you go. Well, Christian, we appreciate you taking time to talk to us and share your story. Very cool stuff. Folks, you've seen him here, Christian Twigg on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.